Good afternoon. This is Eric Brotman, the president of Brotman Consulting Group in Timonium, Maryland, and also CEO of BFG Financial Advisors. I'm here with Rob Brown from Truist Fan Coaching. Rob, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience as well today.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, great to be with you. As Eric said, I'm the founder of Truist Fan Coaching, also the host of the Purpose Focused Advisor podcast. I've been at this industry for a long, long time, so I love having conversations like this one for two reasons. One, they're interesting, and two, um, it's something that is vitally important for advisors to be focusing on, and too often they put it off.
So, working with Rob today, this is going to be a unique experience for our audience because we're going to get to hear not only from a professional coach, but also from a consultant and someone who's doing this myself. So, I started in the financial business 31 years ago, started a company 21 years ago, and started my succession plan 15 years ago when I was in my late 30s. People thought I was nuts. But the succession plan is working and it's still in process. And so we're going to be able to take on our agenda from a couple different angles. In the background, Sarah Losi is our executive producer today. She's in the background, and if you have questions in real time, go to the chat box on the right of your screen. She'll either interrupt us, which I believe she loves to do to me, or we'll wait till the end and see if there's any questions from the group. So Sarah, if you would go ahead and advance the slide, let's look at the agenda today. So four primary topics. The first is we're going to talk about succession planning, not only when to start, but why, and to figure out what the next steps are. And we're going to look at that from each angle. We're then going to talk about G2. G2 is the second generation of advisors in a practice, often 10 to 20 years younger than the founding partners, but nonetheless, G2 is an important component in some practices, and we'll talk about the pros and cons to adding them to a firm. We'll talk about the different paths to succession. There are 5 ways we've identified and probably a dozen more we haven't identified. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll leave you hopefully with some steps you can take as soon as this is over to get started in doing this in your own practice. Rob, did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I think this is a full agenda, and I'm excited to get started.
Let's dig in. The first slide, what's next? Rob, I'm going to let you take first stab at each one of these slides and talk about it from a consulting practice, from from a coaching perspective, some of the things you've seen, and let's talk about what next. And this is sort of the disaster strikes scenario.
Yeah, this has become a topic that I have been increasingly aware of over the last 6 to 12 months as I've had more and more conversations with advisors about succession planning. And there's a tendency to say, well, I don't need to worry about succession planning because I'm not going to sell my business for 15 years or I'm not going to retire for 10 years. The truth is, something can happen in your business today that will force succession if you were to get hit by the proverbial bus. And too many advisors have no contingency plan, or maybe something that's baked into a broker dealer in connection that allows for some sale of the practice that would create some liquidity for the estate, but it's never at the valuation level that the practices are worth today. So when I think about what's next, I think of how important it is to say, okay, I have to stop now because disaster can strike. You can run into situations where you're unable to work, which means something's going to happen to your business, and hopefully it's something that disadvantages you as little as possible. So that's really what I think of first when I think about what next.
When I think of what next, I think about all the different stakeholders in our firm. I think about not only myself as the founding partner, but I think about at this stage the other G2 partners, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think about our employees who rely on the business to be not only active and successful, but to continue to pay their salary and benefits and to continue to exist. I think about our clients and their families who rely on us for advice every day. And so all of these folks would be impacted by an event affecting me. And it could be the bus. It could also be an illness. Sometimes as advisors get older, and cognitive impairment is something we deal with our clients on a regular basis. Well, guess what? That can happen to us too. And there's a difference. You mentioned contingency planning. I think there's a difference between contingency and succession planning. Contingency is literally, I kissed the bus and now the broker dealer or RIA or something is assigning the business to somebody else to do the best they can with it. That is never optimal. It's better than nothing, but only slightly. Succession planning really is something that takes, I think, 5 to 10 years or more to do and do well, because you not only have to have someone financially step into your shoes as now the owner of the firm, but you also have to have clients comfortable with that new person or new people. You have to have employees comfortable with that new person or new people, and it takes time. I mean, one thing I know about our employees is they don't love change in general, and maybe that's a human thing, but they don't love change unless they've played some role in it along the way. And so succession planning is something I don't think we should be afraid of. I think we should tell our clients, tell our team what that succession plan is, and quite frankly, knowing that this business is in good shape, even if that bus happens to me tomorrow, does help me sleep at night. I know my family will be okay, and I know the business and all the stakeholders will be okay. So I think that is the basis of this conversation. Sarah, if we jump to the next slide, there are lots of different ways to do succession, but the first is like a binary conversation, which is, do you add, for lack of a more elegant term, junior advisors or newer advisors or not? And Rob, why don't you take a stab at this first and tell us what your experience has been in this regard?
So, if you don't mind, Eric, I'd like to bounce back to
Oh,
the one of the
absolutely.
last things you said,
Yeah.
because I completely agree. There's a there's a huge difference between contingency planning and succession planning. I totally get that. And my um, comment really kind of related to the fact that you can't rely on those contingency plans. But you pointed out something really important as it relates to succession and sharing that succession plan. That
Hmm.
I have advisors that I speak with, and they are afraid of sharing their succession plan with their team. It's kind of like a wealthy client afraid to talk about their children about their wealth because they don't want to tip them off. So sometimes that happens in the business
Yeah.
on the team side, but also on the client side. What I find in reality is when you have a succession plan in place and you take the time to explain it to your clients, their reaction is, oh, so basically you're doing for you and your business and your team and your family the same thing that you're telling us to do in our financial plan. And so I see that happen over and over again. I just didn't want to let that pass.
No, no, I think you're absolutely right. I tell people a lot, never ever eat in a restaurant where the chef won't eat. And this is one of those cases where we have to take our own advice. And we do talk in the same way that we talk to clients about closely held or highly concentrated stock positions. I mean, part of the succession plan is getting chips off the table for founding owners, and we're going to talk about some of the financials here in a little bit. But the reality is, my portfolio for many many years was largely concentrated and overweighted in micro cap and financial services, because that's the reality. And if I was an executive at ABC company, any advisor worth their salt would say you hold a little too much ABC stock. Let's diversify. And quite candidly, that means having, I think, having G2 or some other means to do that while you're still working. So let's talk about G2. G2 means a lot of different things to a lot of people. What is your either definition or way to describe that?
So to me is that next generation of advisor, and oftentimes it's a junior partner that is coming in or being promoted inside of an organization to be able to be the internal succession, the number two to the G1, the senior advisor. And we talk about it like, use this term G2, but when I think about it, I've been at this for over 30 years. And I've helped I couldn't count the number of partnerships that I've helped put together, both in um, firms owned by the advisors and those where they're inside of a firm where they're forming partnerships in a captive organization. And what invariably happens is that a senior advisor says, I can't keep doing this all myself. Or I'm the investment guy and I don't want to become the financial planning guy. I need to bring somebody in to help me do that. And then there's this uh, big kind of audience of younger advisors that see the success that that older advisor has had and says, I want a piece of that action. And I would be willing to do the planning work. And I believe that I could increase the value of the business and the deliverable to the client if you let me do that. And then what happens is the older guy says, okay, come on in, tries to pay, 5 cents on the dollar for the junior advisor's time, and doesn't really let go, or tells the junior advisor, well, I've got to also make sure that you get your um, feet wet. So I started out in the business cold walking. So I want you to, even though you said you're going to come in and do planning, I want you to get some clients too. And I want you to go do some cold walking. And all of a sudden, the older advisor trying to be wise, who's never maybe brought in something before, puts these unrealistic parameters on the younger advisor. And then on the flip side, the younger advisor comes in, does a good job for a couple of years and says, now I want to be paid exactly like the senior guy and I want the same ownership. I've already earned my 50% ownership in this business. And you get this butting of heads that doesn't happen when you do the G1, G2 thing the right way.
I agree with you on every point, and you brought up half a dozen different things that I'd love to tackle one at a time. But just from a macro standpoint, um, our firm and the way I've been coaching and teaching other folks how to do this is to really do an ensemble and to really have a shared organization where there are equity opportunities. To me, G2 is not a human, it's a generation, it's several. So at our firm, we have three G1s, three G2s, and three G3s. And it's very much, it's not to create a linear
Right.
hierarchy. We're not trying to create an org chart, but what we are creating is a career path. And so the idea is that as our senior most advisors are the ones doing most of the business development, to your case of telling the new guy or gal to go ahead and bring in business, there's a lot of challenges with that. One of which is if your firm has specific clients you want to represent and work with, those young people may not know those potential clients. They don't have the relationships that you do after 20 or 30 years. So I think it's healthier for the G1s to bring it in and the G2s to work it and to create a symbiotic relationship where everyone's playing a really important role. Um, one of the challenges, and I was a G2 at one point in my career, and one of the mistakes we made was having a grid, was having a compensation structure where I was getting a percentage of the revenue being generated by that client, and it created a disincentive for the G1 to send clients my way because it was functionally a pay cut for him. It was also the way it was structured. It was a disincentive for me to work with firm clients when I could get paid more for the my own clients that I brought in, and it really created some conflicts of interest that I didn't expect. And ultimately, we parted dear friends, but I knew I didn't want to do that again. So when I formed BFG 21 years ago, I decided I was going to bring folks in, but they weren't going to be compensated anyway but salary. So all of our advisors are base salary and paid for certain incentives based on certain activities, but none of them are sales based so that we can tell our clients there's no incentive for them to sell you anything ever. It's about taking great care of you. It's about learning. It's about an apprenticeship and growing into the firm. So to me, G2 is a no-brainer. To me, having young people who can start in operations, learn the business, get licensed, then transition into being prep associates and second chair and taking notes and doing some follow-up and meeting some people and then eventually start running some meetings in tandem and then eventually taking over some of those relationships with people who already know them, trust them, have heard from them, and worked with them, it's a really graceful transition. Now, you mentioned this idea of equity. Hey, I'm doing half the work. I should be paid as much as the owner. I think it's really important to separate the salary that we're paid for the work we do from the ownership we have based on the risk we've taken and the investment we've made. because they're not the same, as you well know. And so for us, we have a path to succession, but we have also a path to equity. And our young people, after hitting certain milestones, have the ability to buy into the firm. Um, we will finance that for them. We'll make it so that it makes sense and it works. But it's going to take 10 people, Rob, to retire me in that sense. And I don't want to go out to the private equity world and have some organization come in and now suddenly run us. And now our employees who've been either, especially owner employees, are now working for some big company, and clients are now in some huge pool, and we want to keep the culture. So I think it's important to give G2s not only the career opportunities, but also the financial and the equity opportunities. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I love a lot about what you said, especially where you started in talking about G1 and G2 being generations, not people. I think because of I can't stop thinking about clients that I'm currently working with that as soon as something like this comes up, the first thought I have is, this is situation in Jim's business and with his G2 Sally, and I just have that picture. So I love that thinking of generational. I love the fact that you map it out, and sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. That path to ownership, the path to succession. Mapping that out can be so difficult because you have to have conversations. And the particular client that I was thinking about um, as we were talking was actually an email that I got earlier today where a G1 and a G2 are trying to get on the same page. The G1 says, I'm not sure if I should give the G2 grace, if I should kick the G2 in the rear end and maybe out, or something in between. But this was in relation to the G2 expressing how he was feeling in the firm. And the thing that he was feeling was, I don't see any path.
Hmm.
He knows he is doing well. He loves his work. He loves the clients that he serves. He's maybe not too in love with his G1 right now, but that's a temporary thing. But he doesn't see the path. And by going through an exercise to kind of figure that out, the good news is they can begin having that conversation. And that's some of the things I do in my coaching work. So I help facilitate those conversations to create the the picture of what is wanted so that you can create the type of path that you have at BFG.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You have to have not only a career path and an education path, but also sort of this financial track to run on. And it's unrealistic to think that two or three or five 28-year-old advisors can stroke a check to buy out one senior level person in a day. It just, even with financing, it just doesn't happen. It takes time. And so to do an internal transition, I think it has to be in tranches. I think it has to be over a period of years, maybe decades, and that you do start this early. Sarah, let's jump to the next slide because we've identified 5 paths. And I mentioned that there are probably 12 more. But let's talk about the first one, which is what most advisors do, Rob. Most advisors work until they can't anymore, and then they just sort of walk away, or maybe they don't walk away at all. It's the die at your desk model. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, you know, I have actually worked with a couple of 90-plus-year-old advisors who flat out said, I am going to die at my desk. That's They just loved coming into the office every day. It was, fewer hours, fewer requirements every day, and that is what they wanted to do. But even in saying that, they knew exactly who was going to do what, both while they were dying at their desks and after they could no longer come to their desks. So I don't think die at your desk is a bad thing as long as it's done intentionally and with a plan so that the um, the advisor, when they die at their desk, their business just doesn't, you know, go off into the ether. Clients don't know which way to go. There's no way to value the practice to determine who's going to um, run it or own it, or if the heirs of the advisor are going to get a financial benefit from that. So I think die at your desk is okay because some there are I think it's fewer today than maybe it was in the case of the two 95-year-olds. I mean, I can still picture them. They're just the grandest old gentlemen, just
Hmm.
true true pioneers of the industry, really. But their decision was intentional. Um, it wasn't just I'm going to ignore the fact that everybody's telling me I have to pay attention to succession.
Well, dying at your desk is a strategy, and I guess it can work. It sounds like you got some examples where it's worked. I would say the only way it works and makes sense for everyone you leave behind is if there is a decent buy-sell agreement, if there's a decent introduction, even if you have your own practice and there's another advisor down the hall from you who has their own practice who's maybe a young buck at 65 or 70, a relative to your 95-year-old, um, who's already met some of the clients where there's already that infrastructure, that relationship. I still think even if it's to die at your desk, you have to tell your clients. You have to say, this is, I'm going to work till I die, but when I do, this is the person you'll be working with, and nothing changes for you. I think that's really an important message, don't you?
Right. And that's why I emphasize it has to be an intentional decision because in connection with that intentional decision is the development of the future people who will work with the clients and how the family is going to be taken care of. But I, I just I guess I want to be careful in how I use that term
Hmm.
because I know there are a bunch of 70 and 80-year-old advisors out there who are doing good things for their clients, and I love it if that's what they want to do. But I hate it. I hate it when they ignore the fact that they've created this thing that has value that
Hmm.
may not show up in the what their heirs get, and maybe their clients really won't get the service that they intend after they die at their desk. So intentionality is really big there.
Intentionality is what makes die at your desk not the same as bury your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist.
Yes.
Which is not on here as a path to succession, though it clearly is one. You could be running your business one day, drop dead the next, and not care what happens. I'd like to think the folks who are listening to us today are not those folks who would consider that, but it is the default if you do nothing. So that's kind of
Yes.
important. So let's talk about internal succession, which for me is fundamentally important, but it's not for everyone. So let's talk about that path, in your opinion.
Yeah. So I think, and Eric, you might disagree, but I think internal succession is the most difficult. And I say that probably partially feeling a little bit stung by a recent client who we developed an internal succession plan over the course of close to 10 years
Hmm.
that in the last 12 months turned into a sale to private equity. And
Hmm.
it's all going to work out great for everybody involved. I'm not saying it's a bad deal, but
Hmm.
I was cheering this internal succession on. Everything was moving along, moving along, moving along. And then you get towards the end, and maybe we made the bite that the G2 was going to have to take the last piece of equity was um, more than he was his. What's that saying about when your appetite your
Your eyes are bigger than your stomach.
your eyes are bigger. Yeah, yeah,
There
exactly.
you go.
I think that's maybe what it was. And so we had to adjust. And so when I say I think it's the hardest, it's because you that's where you really have to map it out. You have to have paths. You have to be willing to have discussions and additions and additional G2s and G3s maybe along the
Yes.
way. And
Yes.
so it's a tough one, but I think it can be the most rewarding because the advisors that I've worked with over the years that have successfully done internal succession, one of the reasons is they like to they feel like they have left the business better than they found it, so that the next generation can then do the same thing. They like that legacy. They like that idea of, hey, this could be like 100-year business,
Yes.
even though I may have only been a part of it for 20 or 30 of those 100 years.
Now, I love the way you frame that because leaving the business in a better way than you found it is not just a concept of business. It's also leaving your clients better than you found them. It's leaving your employees and coworkers and other advisors better than you found them. And I love this 100-year business idea. I mean, I'm 21 years in, and I won't be here for another 79 years. I think that's highly unlikely. The internal succession plan to me, and we've helped a number of firms
Oh, wait, wait,
do.
wait. Let's do that 95 math and try to
Yeah, no,
diet your.
yeah, no, I will not be here in 79 years. I hope I'm here in 49 years, but not 79. But at any rate, the internal succession, one of the things we have to remember is most of the time, G1 takes less money to do this internally than externally because the private equity dollars, the external dollars are so mind numbing right now. The margins on EBITDA, the margins on revenue, the multiples are so ridiculous right now that for folks who want to make top dollar, internal succession is not the way. Internal succession is the way to leave a business better than you found it and to do well and also do good, if that makes sense. External succession, to me, is either a way to get top monetization or it's a path when there simply is no way to do the internal. It's just the only path that may exist to you at that point in time. Internal succession means a lot to me. It means a lot to our folks. And we've seen firms do the external. And what tends to happen with the external is that the largest shareholders make a fortune and everyone else kind of takes it on the chin a little bit. That's not always the case, but that's what I've seen more often than not. I'm trying not to do that to the folks who very much helped build this business alongside me for all these years. So the external deals, there's so many different ways to look at this. There's private equity can buy a minority share and sort of just be a passive investor for working capital. They can buy a 51% share and then tell you how to run your P&L. They can buy a 100% share where you get to ride off into the sunset. What are you seeing out there in terms of the folks who are doing external succession? Do you find that that is primarily a monetization play, or is it a last resort, or is it a combination of the two? Because you certainly can make a lot of money doing it.
Oh, yeah. No, I think in some cases where I've seen external deals come together quickly, it was purely money. The
Mhm,
business owner said, I just can't pass this up. I want to
mhm,
take some money off the table. And the more they were willing to sell, the higher the multiple, which meant the more they had in their pocket. And then they settled for what how they were left in the business, if they were left in the business at all after the fact. So I think a lot of times it is that, or it's the need for a quick sale.
yeah.
You plan to die at your desk, or you thought you planned to die at your desk or the internal succession, and you realize, hey, the time has come that I've got to make a quicker decision,
Yes.
and because the money is out there, they put that plan into place. And my biggest worry in those instances is I know this business runs in cycles, and those cycles include stronger feelings of entrepreneurship at one end of the cycle, and it's okay to be an employee at the other end of the cycle. And it always circles back. So in those external successions, or maybe the sell and stays, which we're going to get into next,
Hmm.
sometimes that creates a real feeling of discomfort when the cycles start switching back to the entrepreneurial side of things, and you realize, hey, I'm only getting a 25% payout on my contribution to the new firm because that's what I agreed to in the external succession plan. But I remember the days of the 98% payouts when I was the owner, and so
Yeah.
I'm wondering in 5 years how many of those are going to start going back the other way.
Well, I'm seeing these deals happen now where the deals from 5 years ago, the G1 doesn't go back, but they leave the business because they don't want to be in that environment any longer than the earnout takes. So they say, look, I'm in this seat for 2 to 5 years, depending on the deal. But then once that's over, I can go do whatever I want to do for a living and change it up a little bit. And the non-compete or non-solicitations are over and so forth. I do think I do think there's some benefit to being able to reinvent yourself. I mean, part of our podcast is about never retiring, graduating to the next phase of life, and as advisors, we need to take our own advice on that too. The external succession plan is incredibly tempting. It is a huge amount of money, and all of the bells and whistles that come with it. Oh, you don't have to take care of your financials anymore, or your IT anymore, or your HR, or your benefits, or oh, I get to just be a financial advisor again. The problem is you're also giving up being a business owner and having some control of that process. And until I find a solution that merges the internal and the external gracefully, I really do think it's a little bit polarizing between the two. You almost have to choose your path. So let's talk about what happens when you sell. I've been selling shares of the company since I was 38 years old. And people thought I was nuts. They thought I was a farmer selling, watermelons at when they were little before they were large on the vine to sell per pound. And my feeling was if I have these folks on the bus, they will be on the bus eternally. And largely that's what we've seen. And all of them want a second or third bite of the apple. So now there's a market for internal succession just by virtue of having over the last 15 years built that. But what do I want to be when I grow up, Rob? And I'm gonna toss that to you first because you've worked with people, and on the coaching front, a lot of it, I'm sure, is about what to be when your identity is no longer tied to I'm a financial advisor. Then what?
Yeah, and that's why we spend a lot of time in my coaching work of really asking our clients what their big dreams are. What is their, why are they doing what they're doing? What's the purpose behind what they're doing? Because sometimes they will have spent a big part of their career attaching their purpose to the growth of their AUM or the growth of their profits. And that's okay. But then when you get to a point where you say, I have just crushed it, I've been very successful, but I don't want to just measure my purpose around the amount of money I'm able to make from this business. It's not about adding, 10%, 15% year over year in net new assets or AUM growth or whatever. It's about being able to do some other things. I have that business owner entrepreneurial bent. That's why I am successful as a financial advisor. But I have a client who is who after we completed his internal succession plan has built a vineyard. I just had a really long conversation with him on Friday, but that didn't happen by accident. We gave him something to do, and that sounds too
No,
prescriptive. We
well,
helped
no,
him
but I know
dream
what
about what it is he really wants. Now he lives in a house that he built on this beautiful vineyard. He's growing grapes, he's growing
well,
hay, he's selling some of his wine. And he said he couldn't be happier. And in 6 months, he's going to get his last check from his internal partners who succeeded. So attaching purpose to it. In that case, it was a business. It could be other things that you want to be involved in your community or in the causes or the other things that you care about. So that's where it's important to make sure that in this conversation around succession, it isn't just about the money, because then it's easier to sell to private equity and take the big check and then not know what you want to do with it.
so I'm not sure if I need coaching or therapy, Rob, but I'm going to throw this out to you and see what happens. One of the challenges as an entrepreneur is it is our goal through succession to make ourselves irrelevant to the business. In other words, if I kiss the bus tomorrow, the business runs without me. It runs smoothly. They don't even miss that I'm gone. They miss my glowing personality, but they don't miss me in any meaningful professional sense. And as soon as you achieve that, you start to wonder, I'm not needed anymore. How do I feel about that? It's a really interesting thing. And there are so many support type programs for G2s, the how to do it, the all of these there are not any that I know of for G1s to say, hey, we're all going through this together. Whether you're 50 or 60 or 70, when you're going through it, there's a point where you say, well, I'm no longer needed in the same way. I want to feel helpful. I want to feel purposeful. I want to feel involved, or I don't want to do it at all. And that's where the sell and stay and the sell and play happen. So I can share my personal plan, and you're welcome to help me find a plan B or C. But I think plan A is pretty good for now, and that is that as I transition out of the CEO seat over the next 30 months or so, I'm going to be transitioning to a growth officer role. I'm going to be almost exclusively remote. My job is going to be to grow the organization, to grow clientele, to grow opportunities, to grow centers of influence, to do a lot of the influencing and podcasting and marketing that we do, but not to have client facing responsibilities. So it's kind of like my first new job in over 30 years, which is exciting. I mean, I'm really excited about it. It also means that, how I'm compensated and how I'm valued by the firm could change fairly dramatically. And so I'm experiencing these things vulnerably in a very personal way. Have you seen folks go through that before? I'm not alone, am I?
Oh, you're absolutely not alone. I spent about 9 years straddling my coaching business and my advisory practice um, because I had to work that out myself. And um, I loved your point about there are these groups for the G2s. They seem to organize that the generation that would typically qualify to be G2s tend to organize better in groups and roundtables and things like that, maybe than some of us who have been at this longer. But that question about can my business run without me is central to the coaching work that I do because that also helps extend on what that dream and that purpose is because you'll never get to that dream or that purpose if there isn't some intentionality behind, okay, I'm not saying that I want the business to run without me right now, but it could, but it could. And if it didn't, what are those things other things I'm going to do? And in some cases, I encourage advisors to say, let's just practice your retirement. Let's start doing some of those things that you think that you want to do as you are stepping away from the business. And how does that feel? And sometimes I'll talk to advisors and they'll say, I'm bored.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
bored, and I think
Uh-huh.
that's like I don't want to minimize grief, but it's like a stage of grief, right? It's like you go through this one stage of boredom that you have to get through before you then start adding back on to figuring out that why and that purpose.
Yes, I can't imagine going from 50 or 60 hours a week to daytime TV. There's not enough golf courses. There's not enough shuffleboard. There's not enough vacations. Life doesn't work that way. And so trying to figure it out, and it's interesting that you said you were straddling the advisory and the coaching. I'm straddling the advisory and the consulting. I'm planning to do a lot more consulting once I have the bandwidth to do that because it does bring me an enormous amount of joy and satisfaction. And also some additional
Right,
media
but
stuff.
I
That's
use
fun
that as
too.
an example of I crossed that. I mean, I straddled it, and then I took the step over the invisible
Yeah.
bridge to walk because you might say, I want to step away from client-facing work.
Hmm.
In my case, it was I don't feel I'm giving my clients everything that they deserve. So it wasn't just about me; it was about
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
clients. But taking that step is hard. But there
Oh
is
yeah.
life on the other side, doing the kinds of things as you suggest that you want to do. So it sounds to me like Plan A is a good plan to keep working out.
Well, that's good. So far, so good then. Trying to figure out, I ask every guest on the podcast what they want to be when they grow up. And finally, after 200 episodes, somebody said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it was dumbfoundingly challenging for me to answer my own question. Here I am all smug in the seat of power, asking people in the hot seat what they want to be when they grow up. And now I'm being asked, and I'm thinking, man, I don't know. I really do. Like, I don't know. I think I want to do X, Y, and Z. These are things I want to do, but who do I want to be? It's a really interesting thing. So when we talk about succession planning, we talk about the ways to monetize a business. We talk about a way to sort of put a capstone on our life's work. Let's face it, financial advisors are generally financial advisors because they're champions and advocates for their clients. We're taking incredibly good care of people. We're doing important work. It's a lot of times high stress work, And giving that up, I imagine it's a little bit like being a surgeon who doesn't do surgery anymore. You're thinking, well, what am I now? And so the sell and stay is an option, and that's going to be my plan A. Sell and play will certainly come at some point, but I don't think I'll ever be idle, Rob. I just don't see it. I don't know how. I don't know what I would do. And I assure you, my wife does not want me puttering around the house all day saying I'm bored, because that's what would happen in 2 days.
Yeah, I was just talking to a client the other day who is selling his practice, and his wife's flat out said, "I love um, my retirement life, and I don't want you to interfere with too much of it."
That's,
So um,
that's
that's okay.
is that hurtful or is that just human? Maybe it's both.
I think that's just human because it's something you have to grow into. It's you don't
Yeah.
turn the switch off and turn another switch on. I think when it comes to this, and you talked about capstone, you could have multiple capstones. You could have
Yep.
the
Yep.
capstone of your advisory practice that leads to some other thing that you get engaged in and do that hard and have fun and achieve the things you want to achieve and say, I'm ready to finish this one and move on to the next one. Um, but it's probably not, at least not for me, it's not going to be playing golf, 5 days a week. That little light white ball is just way, way, way too frustrating.
That's so funny. I gave golf up truly for the good of the game and those who play it. Because I was the hazard on the course. It was a disaster. So Sarah, if we can flip over, Rob, I know we're going to give all of our attendees today some resources to take a look at the end, but let's think about some actionable items, some things that the financial advisors watching today can take away from this presentation and things they can do immediately. And do you want to? What are the things we should have folks start doing right now?
So I love giving action steps out of an event like this. And my first action step would be to any advisor listening, ask yourself, do I truly have a succession plan? And the answer is either yes or no. If it's maybe, it's no. So
Mhm.
honestly, ask yourself that question and then decide, when am I going to start working on it if it is no? And who should I get to help me? And if the answer is yes, I would just ask myself or my partners, we have this, but have we vetted it? Have we had somebody else take a peek at it? Because as advisors, one of the things you tell your clients is, you can plan your retirement if you want to, but it's probably the only retirement you'll ever plan. And so the same
Mhm.
can be true
Mhm.
for succession planning. So I think it's, am I prepared? Do I have a plan? And then the make the decision tree going from there, because you just have to get started now. I don't care how new you are to the business. I don't care if you're G1, G2, G3. That question needs to be asked right away.
So I'm in total agreement with that. I think that's a great binary question, yay or nay. And if the answer is yes, how do we stress test it to make sure it's as good as it can be and that it's still up to date? And if it's no, how do we get one and what are the next steps? I'm going to throw another idea out that folks can do immediately, which is to take a sheet of paper and put it into 4 quadrants and start listing the things as financial advisors that we do every day, that you do every single day. And on one axis, have items that bring you joy and items that don't. Things you love to do and things you don't love to do that you do every day or regularly. And at the top, it's things that make you money or make you more successful. And at the bottom is things that don't. And if you use that simple quadrant and you can find ways to spend as much of your time in the areas that bring you joy. If it happens to be it brings you joy and makes you money, great. If it doesn't, and you've reached a point in your career where that's not the be all end all, that's okay too. Go do some things that you love to do because it's going to help you formulate that next step. The things that do not bring you joy but make the firm money are the things to delegate or outsource. So if you have a G2 who loves to do the nuts and bolts planning and portfolio work and you're bored of doing that after all these years, then that is something that, yes, it makes the firm money, but it doesn't bring you joy. Find somebody in your organization as you're building that succession who loves to do the things that you no longer love to do. And then for the things that bring you no joy and make you no money, see how many you can eliminate, or outsource or just pretend don't exist, because some of those things are brutal, and it will lengthen, not only lengthen your career, it'll help your succession plan, and it'll bring you more happiness every day when you're in the office. And so I would say do that also, because your succession plan begins with figuring out what your plan is going to be when you're stepping away, but it's not a one step. It might be that you're gradually stepping away over 10 years, 20 years. And so transitioning that ownership, one of the financial component is relatively simple. It's internal or it's external. There's business valuation companies. There's lots of ways to value a practice, and that's become table stakes. Now it's about what is the best for you from a life perspective, not a tax or financial perspective. So that's what I would have folks do today, is sit and think about what brings them joy and what makes them money.
Yeah, I think that's great because um, that's where you'll spend more time than you will on the actual plan or succession planning itself. And so I feel like you did a great job of doing what I try to do with my clients is coaching them to help them. That's how you set the direction in answering the question. Can my business run without me? It is probably yes if you're in those high joy, high return activities, and that needs to be at the bedrock of any succession plan. So I think maybe doing the two things that we suggested in concert make really good sense. But
Wonderful.
it's not the thing to put away. I just hear about those um, disasters all the time, and it's unfortunate, and it's unfortunate they're happening to smart people who financially know how to help other people plan that don't plan for themselves.
So we talked about what folks should start doing. What should people avoid doing? What should you walk away going, here's a cautionary tale, don't do X.
So this might sound like a silly one, but it would be if you're a G1 and you're listening to this and you're saying, wow, now I get it. Now I understand that I need a succession plan. Don't start dreaming with your G2 too fast,
Hmm.
um, because sometimes you will say things in conversation that get mistaken for direction. You just want to dream out loud that
Mhm.
your number two, your junior advisor, your G2 um, guys, gals are great sounding boards. They have to listen to you. Um, but
Well, they have to pretend they're listening to you, Rob.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
good point.
they have to
Good
look
point.
look like
But
they're listening to you. Yeah.
yeah, but it's so easy. And I say this out of recent experience where I had a client who had a great idea for something that was going to be important in a succession plan. He's used to brainstorming with his junior advisor, and he
Mhm.
brainstormed that idea, and the junior advisor took it as, oh, that's what you're going to do. And then when the actual proposal for partnership and the plan came out, it wasn't there, and it became a point of contention. So um, just avoid have I've used the word intentionality a lot. This whole process needs to be intentional. Work through the process in a way that makes sense and avoid the unnecessary conversations that
Yeah.
can muddy the waters. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Eric, but
Oh, it
it's just
does. It does, because I remember as a G2, I remember what was put in front of me, and it's not what happened, and it wasn't deliberate. It wasn't it wasn't someone trying to pull one over on me. It just didn't make sense, and we didn't realize it, but I treated it as gospel as a G2. I think that's sage advice, and to encapsulate that, what you want to avoid doing is over communicating to the very people who would be on the other side of what really is a huge transaction. I mean, you want to be aligned, but you don't necessarily want to be over communicating. I think that's good advice. The other thing I would avoid doing is putting this off. You talk about simple. If inertia is the most powerful force in the universe and we're doing nothing, then we're inert. It's time to pull this out and take it seriously. This is a great time. It's the holidays, it's the year end. I know there's stuff to do and stuff to plan, and we're always busy, but what a great New Year's resolution or a turn the page thing to say in 2025, I'm going to work out a succession plan. I'm going to have some sense of how I want to do this. And you start with inventory. Who is in our firm? Is anyone in our firm in a position where they could or might want to do this? Don't ask them yet. Just determine for yourself. Are the right horses in the stable first? If the answer is yes, then you can begin working with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, your coach or consultant, and talking about how to bring this up. If you don't have the right horses in the stable, it's now we have to figure out how do we identify the person or people who are going to fill the gap when I'm gone. And a lot of times it's not one human. A lot of times to replace somebody who's an entrepreneur who's built a business, particularly if he or she's done it by themselves, we tend to, as an entrepreneur who builds it ourselves, we have to do both things. We have to be the technician and do the planning, but we also have to be the business developer and do the selling and the marketing. There are a lot of people out there who are awesome at one or the other, but not both. And so it's possible that in order to do this, you're going to need two humans, not one, in order to fill the shoes that you're in. And that's not patting ourselves on the back. It's just the reality of being a single human startup. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I would actually back that up with the example that I used earlier of the internal succession that went external in the last 12 to 18 months. Part of that was the G3 left
Mm,
and was much more difficult to replace. And so as the G1 was closer to a this is the day that this needs to happen because it was based on his personal planning for his business succession. So sometimes uh, that it can't just be one person. More people need to be involved. So assessing who is on your bench and how they can be part of that and working through that becomes very, very important.
we've covered a lot of ground. Sarah, if we can go to the next slide. Rob, I'll sort of close on one and then I'll let you close on the other. If
Sure.
you go to this QR code, you will find a white paper. It's a very simple read on scaling financial planning practices and using some of these strategies to create long-term success. And they really are about growing an organization, growing an ensemble. And they're the kinds of things that I think if you were to take a look at these five strategies and realize you could grab one for 2025, I think it may make a major improvement in your practice. This is a free download if you'll check out that QR code. And of course, this webinar is going to be evergreen. We're going to put it back out there so we'll be able to come back to this. I want to make sure we flip to the next QR code. And Rob, you can talk a little bit about this one as well.
Yeah. So what I would love you to take advantage of if you're listening is my business optimization scorecard. And this is just a great way to assess where your business is today as it relates to many topics, including your legacy planning, your succession planning. And so if you go to this QR code or go to truistfan.com/scorecard, you can get a copy. It's free. And I welcome you to, it sounds to me, Eric, like it would complement very well what you have offered. Because if people are listening to this webinar and they're saying, gosh, Eric and Rob are really making some sense. This is not ego. This is,
I think we are.
no, I'm just really
Yeah.
happy with what we've been able to deliver during this webinar. But if you really feel that, take advantage of these other free tools because they'll help you on the path that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And Sarah, if you'll flip to the last slide, it has our email addresses on it, and not to mention our likenesses. Were there any questions in the box? I didn't even think to check. I'm not sure if there were during the presentation. If there are no questions, it's because Rob and I were so incredibly thorough that there could possibly be no questions. Was there anything in the chat box?
Nothing has come in. If anyone has a last minute question, they want to drop it in right now, go ahead. We have another minute.
Rob, it's been fun working with you. I do think that what we bring to the table for financial advisors is complementary. And I certainly look forward to the opportunity to work with you again on various things. I mean, this is really, I love the fact that as a consultant, we can make, or and a coach, we can make a difference to a financial practice that makes a difference for all of those employees, stakeholders, and clients. It's like going one to many instead of one to one, and it is an incredible honor and pleasure to be able to do that.
Yeah, it really is. It's the real joy behind what I do. I know that by serving my audience, my clients well, that there's a multiplier effect, and there's nothing better than knowing that my clients personally and professionally have gotten stronger, and that makes their relationships with their clients, their
Exactly.
families, the things that they care about stronger too.
Exactly. Well, I thank you for partnering on this with me. This was a ton of fun. We'll have to do it again. And hopefully folks will reach out to you, reach out to me, and talk about the various ways that we can help them scale their businesses and grow their influence and maybe figure out what they want to be when they grow up.
Absolutely, Eric. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Have a phenomenal holiday season and take care.